The United States is at a serious war with China. And no, not the type of war where guns, bombs, and missiles are involved. Rather, it's a very unfriendly technology competition, and for decades, the United States of America has bullied many countries, especially China, with respect to technological advancement. Well, China decided to fight back, and they did so in such an intense way that all the sanctions placed by the United States were destroyed in a heartbeat. I present to you the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, the device that single-handedly tore down all the sanctions placed by the United States. But how were China and Huawei able to collaborate to secretly develop this behind the scenes, to the point where the United States had no idea about this spectacular device until it launched on the 30th day of August 2023? It's simple, really. Huawei made no flashy launch event. They didn't even make a single announcement. People just woke up one morning and discovered that Huawei had put out a new phone on their flagship web store for customers to purchase. Now, that's not even the craziest part. The whole world was thrown into a dilemma when it announced that all of the initial stocks of the Huawei Mate 60 Pro had sold out within an hour of its launch. Like, people didn't even know the phone was out, and it was already out of stock? This was devastating for the government of the United States, as it dawned on them that this was far from an ordinary phone launch. They had to obtain this phone at all costs to figure out what made it stand out so much. And if you're still wondering why the US was having a headache over an ordinary phone launch in China, I'll tell you in a bit. Now, the tech gurus working for the United States managed to obtain this phone and deconstructed it, and what they found inside was absolutely unbelievable. It was revealed that the Mate Pro 60 contained not only Huawei's Kirin 9000S processor, but also that the phone supported 5G network speed. To give more depth to how shocking this feat was, let me remind you that the last time Huawei released a phone capable of attaining a 5G network speed was in October 2020 when they released the Mate 40 Pro 5G. Now, if you're wondering why Huawei didn't make any other 5G phones since 2020, it's simply because they couldn't. Let's look back at a few years to understand why they couldn't. Prior to 2019, Huawei had been rapidly growing its worldwide share of mobile phones. That was the very year they shipped 240 million, surpassing Apple and falling only slightly behind Samsung. That was when the Trump administration of the United States imposed sanctions on Huawei, claiming that these guys were working behind the scenes with the Chinese government to infiltrate the United States. Obviously, Huawei argued that the United States had never been more wrong, and this was nothing more than a political endeavor to restrict sales of Huawei devices and sell more iPhones. The company stated that they weren't doing any of the things the US government accused them of. This didn't stop the sanctions, and in 2019, the sanctions went into full effect. The unreasonable sanctions made it difficult for Huawei to source some of the components they needed to build their devices. This particular sanction also restricted their access to Google's Android operating system. Huawei struggled to keep up with their phone production, and for about a year, their products didn't suffer too much. Not until 2021, when the sales began to decline rapidly around the world because of the sanctions. However, it still managed to do well in its home country, China. Now, taking a look at the usual components of a typical Huawei device. I already mentioned the Kirin 9000S processor chip, which is created by Huawei's semiconductor division, HiSilicon. But because HiSilicon is only a design faculty and not a manufacturing company, they rely on TSMC of Taiwan to manufacture its chips. However, the United States, in all their glory, was capable of pressuring Taiwan into not selling chips to the Chinese government. This made it impossible for Huawei to access the chips they needed to attain 5G speeds, and that explains why they couldn't make any other 5G phone. But it's clear from the launch of the Mate 60 Pro 5G that Huawei didn't succumb to this wicked intimidation from the United States and have been doing heavy research behind the scenes on how to produce 5G chips in China. Taking a look at this device, it's more than safe to say they just might have succeeded. These sanctions placed by the United States were a direct attack on the Chinese government. It was very clear that the US wanted to retain supremacy in technological advancement, and under the disguise of national security, they placed restrictions on many Chinese technological companies. So the war was far from over. Huawei invested over 161.5 billion yuan, which is around $23 billion, in research and development in the year 2022 alone. Huawei also has some of the best minds in the engineering game, and it didn't take long before they figured out how to create their own 5G chips. Huawei worked hard and closely with China's top chip fabricators SMIC. And the rumors have it that SMIC produced the 5G semiconductors for the Mate 60 Pro. Also, the Chinese government has pledged to invest $1.6 trillion in the semiconductor industry over the next decade. This investment will be used to build new chip factories, develop new chip designs, and train more bright minds in this field of engineering. The popular saying, "Don't let them know your next move," is exactly what Huawei pulled off with the design of the Mate 60 Pro. This device did not only come as a shock to the world, but it also came as a surprise to even some of Huawei's senior employees. This was very smart and the right course of action to take because some of those employees could have been feeding information to the United States. Many might see these steps and actions as usual and conventional business methods, but it was way beyond that. This was slowly turning out to be a full-fledged technology war, and Huawei just dropped their version of the Hiroshima nuclear bomb with the release of the Mate 60 Pro. This is how Huawei and China were able to beat the sanctions and are back in the competitive market with other mobile phones around the world. The Huawei Mate 60 Pro is the first phone to use the new Chinese 7nm microprocessor technology chips, and I cannot emphasize enough that this was developed despite the imposition of US sanctions on the company. To give you an idea of how small a 7nm processor is, 1 nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. 1 nanometer equals 10 to the power of -9 meters. A strand of human hair is approximately 80,000 minus 100,000 nanometers in width. A strand of DNA is about 2.5 nanometers in diameter. The size of a silicon atom is about 0.2 nanometers. Therefore, the components on a 7nm chip are incredibly small, with dimensions that are just a few times the size of individual silicon atoms. This highly advanced manufacturing process allows for billions of transistors to be packed into a chip smaller than a fingernail, enabling faster processing, lower power consumption, and more compact device designs. The Mate Pro 60 is indeed a fabulous phone. Testing the barriers of conventional phone creation and supporting 5G speeds, this handset is also capable of making satellite calls. The United States is not happy about this, and we can only wait to see what measures they will put in place to try and retain their top spot. But do you think they still occupy the top spot?